Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Victorian and early 20th century baby farming. The darkest business is a new, fascinating and quite disturbing book by Eve Bacon. This is something I have never come across before. And I must say it made me stop and pause. I know I made lots of sort of jokes about, how do you plant your toddler, etc. But this is something quite serious. Delighted to say that joining me live on the line from the UK is the author of Victorian and Early 20th Century Baby Farming, Eve Bacon. Eve, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you with us. This sounds like something from, I don't know, a sort of dark Dickens novel. What exactly was Victorian baby farming?
Well, basically, it was people looking after other people's babies, which could be a good thing. Although, because the baby farmers expected a premium money to be paid over, particularly when they decided to adopt the child,
right? Then
it paid for them not to feed the children terribly well. And so they tended to waste away. And in some cases, the baby farmers hurried that along. And 8 baby farmers were hanged for murder. 10 were found guilty of murder, but 8 were actually hanged for murder.
Good grief. When you say they were giving them away, is this sort of... is this a child care sort of thing? It's not a day-by-day thing. It is a day-by-day thing.
Well, it could be either.
Right.
You could pay for a weekly amount and then you could have access to your child, and the hope is that you would take your child back in the end. Or you could pay a one-off payment and your child would be adopted. And in some cases, that's exactly what happened, that the baby was brought up by the family that it went to live with and lived a very long and happy life. But more often, the baby farmer was doing it for an income, and therefore it paid for them to get rid of the child as quickly as possible.
I mean, I suppose one of the things is this, and especially the Victorian period, we think of it as this. I mean, the Victorian period is fascinating because you have the high sort of morality of the time, but there's this very dark underbelly. So on the one hand, you have children's hospitals being set up, social trusts being set up, social housing being set up. You think of, those fine organisations, Barnardo's, etc. And yet there is this and all the philanthropy that's going on at the time, industrialists putting something back in society, and this is presumably it's almost it's a version that when done well, I suppose, works, but when done purely for financial aim, it's something quite terrible.
Yes. And in fact, in my book, I give an example of a juxtaposition of an advertisement in the newspaper that was put in by a baby farmer who was looking for a child. And right underneath that, there's another advertisement for showing your baby off at a baby show to show how wonderful your baby is. And it's a real juxtaposition because they're in exactly the same newspaper, one advert underneath the other. So yes, it's exactly that. It's a real dichotomy of the time.
And when we say baby farming, I mean, if you mentioned farming, I mean, adopt. You can kind of sort of imagine hey, we've all seen Oliver. You imagine sort of orphanages, etc. But baby farm, you tend to think of, I don't know, what is it, 20, 30 babies at a time? I mean, was there such a thing as a typical setup? I mean, were these things were they in industrial areas? Were they out in the country? I mean, how did they physically operate?
Very often they were in large cities, although they could be in more country areas as well, because the problem, particularly of illegitimacy, happened all over the country. Sometimes there were perhaps 2 babies in a household, and in which case they needed to be registered as baby farms, or there could be 10 there. And in fact, one of the women that was hanged, they found nine babies in her house when they went in there.
And I suppose the thing is, I mean, it is was this sort of policed in it anyway then? Or was this sort of an undercover? I mean, was it, because as you said...
Well, it was well known that it happened, and there were a lot of people who were trying to get legislation to stop it. Over the years, this went on and on with lots of different people trying to get legislation. When, when a lot of corpses started turning up in the same area, the police tended to set up task forces to find where the babies were coming from. And the police did some really, really good detective work to find baby farmers. And in fact, 2 of the women that were found guilty were found just that way.
I suppose one of the things as well is, you know, this is a business or an organisation that is an easy place for. I mean, we would call it child trafficking now, wouldn't we? I mean, abuse and all sorts of abuse could be meted out without any sort of safeguards whatsoever.
Yeah. You're right. I don't know that we'd necessarily call it trafficking. These were generally small babies, rather than older children. Not always, but generally. And yeah, it was a business. It was there to make money. Even the good baby farmers were expecting to either they would take them on a weekly basis and therefore a bit like fostering, would get so much a week, and that would help supplement the family income. Or the really good baby farmers were women who actually really loved children and wanted to bring them up. And I have a case in my book where a baby farmer passed a child on to a family, and she stayed with that family until she was an adult, and in fact kept in touch with them right up until she was an old lady in the 1960s. I was fortunate enough to have contact with her grandchildren, who gave me a lot of information about her.
So when did this first come across? When did you first find out about baby farming, and how did you do the sort of research in this? I mean, are there records in the public order offices? I mean, how did you go about sort of researching this?
Well, initially I was researching Amelia Dyer, who is the most notorious of the baby farmers.
Right. And
I realised that there was more to the story of baby farming than I had originally thought. I started off by looking at newspaper articles which mentioned baby farms, and was amazed at the number of women that were coming up that way. And I found, in fact, over 100 baby farmers that way. And then, of course, those that were the most notorious, there are records in the National Archive about them, and records of their trials.
So talk us through Amelia then, who is the most notorious. What was she like? And I mean, without being too graphic, because I think some people are probably still just finishing their breakfast over here in Spain. But what were sort of her crimes, as it were?
Well, she came from Bristol, and she is first heard of in the 1870s, where she runs into trouble with babies. The authorities realise that she's running baby farms, and she gets imprisoned then. But she comes out and she carries on the trade until the 1890s, when she's found. She's by now moved to Reading, and she's been throwing bodies into the river there. And she gets found, and by that time she's strangling them.
If you gave, I mean, this is horrendous. If you said that it's a weekly sort of situation in some cases, and you could, so a mother or a family could, because there is a big problem. There's a stigma of illegitimacy. There is the problem of young women, obviously, having babies as well when they're 15, 16, whatever, because of the working class backgrounds and that whole Victorian quote unquote morality. But you could almost, and let me put this correct, you could almost sort of pawn your child and then give it and then come back and pick it up or buy it back a little bit later on. Am I getting that correctly?
Well, it's a bit more like, I suppose, fostering.
Right.
If you relate it to modern day fostering, you needed somebody to look after your child, and those children that were paid for on a weekly basis tended to do better than those that were adopted,
right?
Because they had a regular income, so it was worth keeping the child alive and looking okay, so that you could, when the mother came to visit, the mother wasn't going to take the child away.
Right, and of course this is the era as well of the penny dreadful, isn't it? And the first sort of mass-produced media. So, sort of baby farms and sort of women carrying out the horror stories must have made the penny dreadfuls the press. I mean, it must have been big news.
Yeah, and they were also mentioned in theatre, in plays and things like that. And there were ballads made about them. Particularly, there's one about Amelia Dyer that was did the rounds after she was hanged. So
I'm amazed that this practice only died out. What sort of Edwardian? I mean, when was baby farming finally made illegal, or was it the creation of a welfare state, or is it people? I mean, how does this practice sort of die out? Is it public opinion that turns it?
Well, the last baby farmer to be hanged was in 1907.
Blimey!
And yes, it's by 1908. The Children's and Young Persons Act said that foster mothers needed to be supervised.
Right.
So that tended to ease it off. But it wasn't until 1939 with the Adoption Act that you were no longer allowed to advertise for babies or receive payment for taking them.
1939. I mean, I thought 1908 Edwardian era was too late, but 1939 in terms of it being illegal is quite something.
Yeah, I mean, by then it tended not to be happening so much, but certainly that was when the legislation knocked it on the head completely.
So what's it? I mean, how when you come to put a book like this together, I mean, what are you hoping that people will learn from it? A historical document, or how far we've come, or just to sort of put these stories out there in the light again? Because I must admit, it's something that I haven't come across before.
I think really I just felt it needed to be aired. It needed to be mentioned. It was something that I found absolutely fascinating, although having said that, I did have to stop writing it on occasions because some parts were quite harrowing to research. But I felt it was something that needed to be mentioned. We think about the Victorian era as being something either beautiful with rich people in fabulous dresses, or we think about your paupers who, were trying to scrape a living together. What we don't think about is people taking advantage of other people in the way that baby farmers took advantage of a situation.
Indeed.
And I felt that story needed to be out there.
Well, congratulations on bringing it to our attention, because I haven't heard of this one before. The book is called Victorian and Early 20th Century Baby Farming: The Darkest Business. It is by Eve Bacon. Eve, if people want to find you, by the way, you can order the book as well via our own virtual bookstore. If people want to find you online, Eve, where's the best place to find you in the nicest possible way?
I've got. I'm on Facebook as Eve Bacon. There aren't many of us there, and my husband runs a company called Live and History, and we have a website, liveandhistory.uk.
Can I just ask you this question then? If you're both historians, is it the sort of an outbidding thing that you keep it quiet before you've got the thing revealed, so that you don't go? So it's like, aha, what are you working on? Oh, can't take the moment, and then you go, aha, the baby factories, because otherwise he might say, oh, I know all about that one.
No, we talk and we share, and sometimes his interest is the history of medicine. So he's been telling me gruesome things for very many years now.
Oh, I must get you both over for a dinner party in that case, in that one. This book is called Victorian and Early 20th Century Baby Farming, The Darkest Business. It's by Eve Bacon, who we're speaking to today, and it will be available. You can download it, or you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. Eve, it's a fascinating, if slightly disturbing tale. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Giles. Nice to talk to you.